My husband asked for a divorce. He said, "I want the house, the cars, everything except the son." My lawyer begged me to fight. I said, "Give it all to him?" Everyone thought I had lost my mind. At the final hearing, I signed everything over. He didn't know I had already won. He smiled until his lawyer turned pale when, "Before I tell you how I legally destroyed him without lifting a finger, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. And what time it is there." I read every single one. San Diego sunlight usually feels like a promise, but that Tuesday morning, it felt like a spotlight in an interrogation room. We were sitting at the kitchen island Kakata gold marble, imported from Italy. I remember choosing that slab 3 years ago. I remember arguing with the supplier, tracking the shipping container, and personally supervising the installation to ensure the veining aligned perfectly. Now, it was just the surface where my marriage was being liquidated. Brandon didn't look at me. He was scrolling through emails on his tablet, treating the end of our 14-year relationship like a minor, scheduling conflict. He took a sip of his espresso made in the machine I bought him for our anniversary, and finally set the device down. He didn't look sad. He looked impatient. "This isn't working anymore, Alyssa," he said. His tone was professional, the same voice he used when firing a vendor who couldn't meet a deadline. "I've outgrown this. I need a partner who matches where I'm going, not where I've been." I didn't blink. I didn't reach for a tissue. I just watched his hands. They were manicured steady. He wasn't nervous because he didn't think I was a threat. To him, I was just part of the back-end infrastructure essential for operations, but invisible to the public. And infrastructure doesn't fight back. It just gets replaced. "Here's how it's going to go," he continued, sliding a single sheet of paper across the cold stone. "I keep the firm. I keep the brand. I keep the house. You get Ethan. I'll give you a one-time cash settlement of $60,000 to get set up somewhere modest. That's generous, considering you haven't brought in a new client in 6 months. I looked at the paper. It was a term sheet. He had bullet-pointed our life. The coastal estate valued at $1.2 million retained by husband. The Lux Design Group, retained by husband. The 2024 Range Rover retained by husband. Ethan, age 16, custody to wife. He was discarding me. He was erasing 14 years of my labor. The late nights balancing the books, the creative direction that won him the Designer of the Year award, the silent management of his ego, and offering me $60,000 like it was a severance package. Any other woman might have screamed. She might have thrown the espresso in his face or begged him to remember the vows we took. But I wasn't just a wife anymore. In that moment, the emotional part of my brain shut down and the chief financial officer part woke up. I looked at the marble. I looked at the term sheet and I saw something Brandon didn't. He wasn't asking for assets. He was demanding a bomb. He wanted the empire. Fine, he could have it. He could have the prestige, the address, the image. Because I knew what lay beneath the foundation. I knew about the cracks in the load-bearing walls that he was too arrogant to inspect. I folded my hands on the table. My heart rate didn't even spike, it was clinical. "Okay," I said. Brandon blinked. He leaned back, frowning slightly, waiting for the scene. He wanted the tears. He wanted the validation of my devastation to prove how valuable he was. "Okay," he repeated. "You want the house and the business. You want a clean break." I agree. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blouse. "Draw up the papers, Brandon. I'll sign whatever you want." I walked out of the kitchen before he could see the ghost of a smile touching my lips. He thought he was firing me. He had no idea I was letting him sign his own death warrant. Most people look at a woman in my position, 14 years deep, silent, standing in the shadow of a loud man, and they see a victim. They see someone weak. They ask the question that always haunts women like me. Why didn't you leave sooner? They assume I stayed out of love or fear or that pathetic hope that he might wake up one day and finally appreciate me. They are wrong. I didn't stay because I was weak. I stayed because I was calculating. For the first decade, I was the invisible engine of Lux Design Group. Brandon was the face charming, handsome, great at shaking hands and drinking scotch with clients. But I was the one who turned his sketches into blueprints. I was the one who negotiated with contractors who tried to overcharge us. I was the chief financial officer, the creative director, and the crisis manager, all for a salary of $0 a year. My payment was supposed to be our shared future. But 3 years ago, I realized that future was a lie. I discovered the rot at the center of the business. And that is when the dynamic shifted. There is a concept in psychology called the sunk cost fallacy, or the invisible chain of the survivor. It is the trap that keeps you tethered to a failing investment because you have already poured so much of your life into it. You convince yourself that if you just give one more year, one more massive effort, you can fix it. You think you can save the ship. I felt that chain. It was heavy. It wrapped around my throat every time Brandon dismissed me in public or took credit for my work. It whispered that leaving meant admitting I had wasted a decade of my life. But then the analytical part of my brain took over. I realized I wasn't fighting for a marriage anymore. I was managing a liability. If I had left 3 years ago, when I first found the cracks in the foundation, I would have been crushed by the debris. My name was still on the loans. My credit was still tied to his. If I had walked out, then his collapse would have been my collapse. So, I didn't leave. I stayed. I treated the marriage like a hostile work environment that I couldn't quit yet. I stopped investing emotion and started investing in an exit strategy. I became a structural engineer inside a condemned building. My goal wasn't to save the building. It was to brace the walls just long enough to get the civilians out. The civilian was my son, Ethan. For 3 years, I played the part. I nodded when Brandon bragged. I smiled when he bought things we couldn't afford, but in the background, I was methodically untangling myself. I removed my name from the new business lines of credit. I refused to co-sign the refinancing on the house, claiming I wanted to protect his credit score from my student loans. I moved my inheritance into a trust he couldn't touch. I wasn't suffering in silence. I was de-risking my portfolio. So when he sat me down at that marble table and fired me from my own life, he thought he was discarding a broken woman. He didn't realize he was giving me the one thing I had been working toward for 36 months. He was giving me the escape hatch. And he was volunteering to stay inside the burning building alone. The speed of my replacement wasn't just efficient. It was corporate. Brandon didn't wait for the ink to dry on the term sheet. He moved Madison in 48 hours after our kitchen table talk. She was 24. An intern I had hired 6 months ago because I thought she had an eye for color. It turned out her primary talent was ambition. They announced the rebrand on Instagram before I had even packed my first box. A sleek black and white post. Luxe Design Group Evolution. I scrolled through the website on my phone. My bio was gone. My name was scrubbed from the founding documents. The awards page, which listed the 3 industry accolades I had won personally, now listed them as agency wins. And there, under the creative team header, was Madison. Her title was Head of Vision. She was wearing my vintage Channel blazer and her head shot. It was a public execution of my career. They weren't just taking the business. They were stealing the credit. Brandon was rewriting history to make it look like I had never existed. Like the last decade of success was solely his genius manifested. But the digital eraser was nothing compared to what they did to the house. The sunroom was my sanctuary. It was the only room in that glass and steel mausoleum that felt human. I had restored it by hand, sourcing vintage terracotta tiles from a salvage yard in Tuscany, nursing fiddle leaf figs back to health in the corners. It was where I drank my coffee. It was where I breathed. I came home on a Thursday to pack the last of my books, and I heard the sledgehammers. Dust was billowing into the hallway. I walked to the back of the house. Madison was standing in the doorway holding her phone up, filming a story for her followers. Demo day, she chirped, panning the camera over the destruction. Finally getting rid of this dark, dated energy. We're turning this into a white box content gym. Yoga mats, mirrors, and ring lights. Baby, minimalism is the new luxury. Dark and dated. She was smashing rare Italian craftsmanship with a sledgehammer to make room for a ring light. I watched a workman toss a piece of terracotta into a dumpster bin. It shattered. That tile had survived 200 years in an Italian villa, only to die because a 24-year-old influencer needed better lighting for her glute workout. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to stop. I simply calculated the value of the renovation costs adding to the already maxed out credit cards. Keep digging. Brandon, I thought. Make it expensive. Oh, Alyssa, Madison said, lowering her phone. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked triumphant. Sorry about the noise. We just really wanted a fresh start. You know how it is. Out with the old, it's going to look very expensive, I said calmly. That's the point, she smiled. Then the doorbell rang. It was the final insult. Catherine, my mother-in-law, had arrived to supervise. She walked in, wrinkled her nose at the dust, and immediately began directing the movers. Brandon hadn't hired a professional packing service. He'd hired 2 guys with a van and a stack of cheap, thin cardboard boxes. Catherine stood over me while I folded my clothes. You really let yourself go, didn't you? She said, gesturing vaguely at my lack of makeup. Brandon needs someone with energy. Someone who represents the brand. You stopped trying, Alyssa. You got comfortable. Comfortable, I had been. Keeping her son out of federal prison for 3 years, juggling creditors and tax audits, and she thought I was comfortable. You should have fought for him, she added, sniffing disdainfully as she kicked a box of my shoes toward the door. A real woman keeps her husband interested. You let him drift. This is the consequence of your apathy. I taped up the box. The sound was loud, a sharp rip that cut through her lecture. You're right, Catherine, I said, my voice flat. I should have paid more attention to a lot of things, like the fact that your son is a fraud. Make sure you take everything, she snapped, checking her watch. Madison wants the closet empty by noon. We don't want any clutter. I looked at her. I looked at Madison posing in the rubble of my sunroom. I looked at Brandon, who was on the phone in his glass office, laughing loudly, playing the role of the Titan. Clutter. I picked up the last box. It was heavy, filled with the financial records I had printed out 3 years ago. The evidence. Don't worry, I said, walking toward the door. I'm leaving you with exactly what you deserve. 3 years ago I became an insomniac, not because of stress, but because of discovery. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Brandon was working late again, which I later learned meant drinking scotch with potential investors he never closed. I was in my home office, reconciling the quarterly accounts for Lux Design Group. The numbers weren't adding up. There was a discrepancy in the vendor payments funds going out to suppliers we hadn't used in months. I pulled the raw bank data and then I saw it. It started as a trickle. A few thousand here for consulting fees, a few thousand there for marketing expenses. But when I cross-referenced the EINs, the companies didn't exist. The money was being funneled into personal accounts. Brandon's personal accounts. I kept digging. I pulled the credit reports. I pulled the tax filings. What I found was a financial crime scene. The business wasn't just struggling. It was insolvent. Brandon had taken out high-interest, merchant cash advances, predatory loans with daily repayment schedules just to cover payroll. He had maxed out every line of credit. The house, which I thought we had 50% equity in, had been leveraged to the hilt with a second and third mortgage I had never signed for. He had forged my signature, but the kill shot was the letter from the IRS. It was buried in a digital folder named Old Projects. Notice of intent to levy. He hadn't paid payroll taxes for 6 quarters. He was using the employees' withholdings to fund his lifestyle. The lease on the Range Rover, the dinners, the image. That wasn't just debt. That was a felony. The total liability was 2-3 million. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the monitor illuminating the ruin of my life. My first instinct was to wake him up and scream, to demand answers to fix it. But then I looked at the numbers again. If I confronted him now, he would deny it. He would gaslight me. He would say I didn't understand high finance. And worse, if we divorced now, half of this debt would be mine. California is a community property state. His fraud was my fraud. His ruse. I made a choice. I didn't scream. I started a spreadsheet. I named the file The Exit. For the next 36 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the supportive wife, nodding along to his delusions of grandeur. By night, I was a forensic accountant, dismantling my own exposure. I stopped commingling funds. I opened a separate high-yield savings account in a bank he didn't use. I deposited every cent of my inheritance from my grandmother, 300,000 directly into it. I quietly sold the crypto portfolio I had bought years ago, which had ballooned to another 300,000, and moved that too. I built a firewall of cash, 625,000. That was legally traceably separate property, and I let him dig. Every time he wanted to sign a new loan, I found a way to be unavailable to sign, forcing him to take it in his name alone. Every time he wanted to expand, I encouraged him to be the sole visionary, feeding his ego so he would keep my name off the paperwork. I watched him drowning, and I didn't throw him a rope. I built a raft. Back in the present, I sat in the conference room of Nina's law firm. The polished mahogany table was covered with my evidence, 3 binders color-coded. Binder 1 the debt, Binder 2 the fraud, Binder 3 the bomb. Nina Castellano. My attorney was a woman who smiled rarely and billed heavily. She flipped through Binder 3, her eyes widened. She looked up at me, then back at the page, then at me again. "You have the IRS notification." She said it wasn't a question. "I do, and he doesn't know you have this. He doesn't know I know how to read a profit and loss statement, let alone a tax levy notice." Na closed the binder. She took off her glasses. "Alyssa, if we litigate this normally, the court will split the assets and the debts. You could still be on the hook for some of this, especially the marital debt." "I don't want to litigate normally," I said. "I want to settle." I slid a single document across the table. It was a draft settlement agreement. I give him everything. The house, the business, the cars, the furniture, the brand. I keep my separate property inheritance and my son. And in exchange for my generosity in waiving my rights to the company, I pointed to paragraph 4. He signs a sole assumption of liabilities clause. He indemnifies me against all business and marital debts, known and unknown. Na read it. She looked at the debt total in the binder, 2 to 3 million. Then she looked at the settlement offer assets worth maybe 1.5 million on paper, but effectively 0 in reality. "You're giving him a -1 million gift," she whispered. "He thinks he's winning the lottery," I said. "He thinks he's getting the empire for free." Na leaned back. A slow, terrifying grin spread across her face. "He'll sign it," she said. "His ego won't let him check the math." "Exactly," I replied. "He's not a businessman, Nina, he's a narcissist. And narcissists never look at the price tag until the bill comes due." The mediation took place in a glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor. The view was panoramic. The ocean, the city, the sprawl of the life we had built. It was designed to make you feel powerful. Brandon walked in 10 minutes late. He wasn't wearing a suit of mourning for our marriage. He was wearing a victory lap, navy bespoke cut, silk tie, and on his wrist, a brand new watch, a Royal Oak offshore. Retail price 45,000. I knew exactly how he paid for it. He didn't. He charged it to the corporate Amex 2 days ago. I saw the alert on my phone before I disconnected the notifications forever. He sat down, threw his phone on the table, and didn't look at me. He looked at his lawyer, Samuel, a man in his 60s with white hair, and the tired expression of someone who spends too much time managing adult toddlers. "Let's get this over with," Brandon said, checking the time on the stolen watch. "I have a site visit at 2. Na slid the settlement agreement across the table. It was thick. The asset transfer section was on top. The liability schedule was buried at the back, referenced only as Exhibit C. "The terms are as discussed," Na said, her voice dry as parchment. "Alyssa waives all interest in Lux Design Group and the marital residence. She retains custody of Ethan and a singular payment of 60,000 for relocation costs." Brandon laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. 60 grand, that's it. You're walking away from a multi-million-dollar brand for 60 grand. He looked at me then, shaking his head with mock pity. "You always did settle for less, Alyssa." No vision. I didn't respond. I was watching him through a specific lens, a psychological concept called the delusion of power in an empty wallet. See, narcissists like Brandon confuse spending power with owning power. To him, the ability to swipe a card means he is wealthy. He believes that if he sits in the CEO chair, wears the watch, and drives the car, the reality of the bank balance doesn't matter. He thinks his status is an intrinsic quality of his soul, not a least facade. He believes he is the sun, and debt is just the gravity trying to hold him down. He looked at the papers, seeing only the assets. He saw the word house and thought mine. He saw company and thought king. He didn't see the invisible chains attached to them because he believes he is too important to fail. Samuel, however, was not delusional. He picked up the agreement and started reading. He frowned. He flipped to the back. He stopped. Brandon, Samuel said, his voice low. We need to pause because you're taking the whole company. That means you're taking the whole balance sheet. I haven't seen a recent audit. We need to run a due diligence check on the liabilities before you sign this. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment. If Samuel dug, if he pulled a current credit report, the game was over. We don't have time for an audit. Brandon snapped. That takes weeks. Madison and I are launching the rebrand on Friday. I want this done today. I strongly advise against that, Samuel said, taking off his glasses. Alyssa was the CFO. She knows the numbers better than you do. If she's walking away this easily, I want to know why. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. She's walking away because she's weak, Sam. Because she knows she can't run it without me. I built this company. I know what it's worth. He grabbed the pen. I'm not waiting for some accountant to tell me I'm rich. I know I'm rich. Samuel looked at him. He saw the ego. He saw the futility of arguing with a god complex. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Then sign this first, Samuel said coldly. It's a waiver of counsel. It states that I advised you to audit the financials and you refused. If this goes south, you can't sue me for malpractice, Brandon sneered. He signed the waiver with a flourish. Then he pulled the divorce agreement toward him. Give me the pen, he said. He signed his name on the line that gave him the empire. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with triumph. Pleasure doing business with you, he said. I looked at the ink drying on the page. The pleasure is all mine, I whispered. The final hearing was supposed to be a formality. For Brandon, it was a coronation. He walked into courtroom 4B like he was stepping onto a yacht. He smoothed his tie. Shot a wink at Madison, who was waiting in the hallway with a bottle of champagne in her tote bag, and took his seat next to Samuel. He radiated the energy of a man who believed he had just pulled off the heist of the century. I sat next to Nina. My hands were folded in my lap. I wasn't looking at Brandon. I was looking at the judge, a stern woman named Honorable Edith Vance, who had zero patience for theatrics. Mr. Mercer, Judge Vance said, peering over her spectacles. You are requesting the dissolution of marriage and the equitable distribution of assets as outlined in this agreement. You understand that by signing this you are assuming full ownership of Lux Design Group and the marital residence. I do, Your Honor, Brandon said, his voice projecting to the back of the room. He sounded like he was accepting an award. And you understand that with full ownership comes full responsibility for all encumbrances, liens, and liabilities attached to these entities. Brandon waved a hand dismissively. Yes, I built the business. I know how it works. He didn't look at Samuel. He didn't look at the thick document in front of him. He just wanted the gavel to bang so he could go start his new life. Very well, the judge said. Sign. The sound of his pen scratching against the paper was the loudest thing in the room. Scratch. Scratch. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping in slow motion. He signed the decree. He signed the asset transfer and then with a flourish. He signed the liability disclosure schedule. He pushed the papers toward the clerk and leaned back. Crossing his arms, he looked at me and smirked. Samuel, being a diligent lawyer, began organizing the signed copies to place them in his briefcase. He picked up the liability schedule. His eyes scanned the top page casually, then stopped. He frowned. He flipped the page. I watched the blood drain from his face. It started at his cheeks and washed down to his neck until he looked like a wax figure. He leaned in close to Brandon. Brandon, he whispered. But the courtroom was so quiet. Did you read Exhibit C? I told you, Sam. I know the numbers. No. Samuel hissed, his hands starting to tremble. You don't. Look at line 14. Brandon looked. He squinted. IRS notice of levy. What is that? It means the company hasn't paid payroll taxes in 18 months, Samuel whispered, his voice rising in panic. It means there is an active criminal audit. So the company pays it. No, Brandon. You just signed a personal guarantee. You signed a waiver of corporate indemnity. Samuel pointed a shaking finger at the bottom of the page. By taking full ownership without an audit, you just personally assumed liability for $2,003 million in debt. And because it's payroll fraud, that's not just bankruptcy. Samuel looked at his client with horror. That is a prison sentence. Brandon froze. The smirk fell off his face like wet clay. He looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. You knew, he mouthed. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat, I just held his gaze. Mr. Mercer, Judge Vance asked, holding the gavel. Is there a problem? Brandon stood up, halfway. Wait, I didn't. I need to rescind. I didn't know about the taxes. Sit down, counselor. Judge Vance snapped at Samuel. Your client signed a waiver of due diligence against your advice 3 days ago. I have it right here. He attested that he had full knowledge of the business operations. The court finds the agreement equitable and binding. Bang. The gavel hit the wood. Divorce granted. Assets and liabilities transferred as signed. Court is adjourned. The judge stood up and walked out. Brandon collapsed into his chair. He looked like a man who had just been told he had terminal cancer. He looked at the empire he had fought so hard to keep. And finally, for the first time in his life, he saw it for what it was. It wasn't a throne. It was a cage. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I didn't say a word to him. There was nothing left to say. The ink was dry. I walked past him, past the pale, shaking lawyer, and out into the hallway. Madison was there holding the champagne, beaming. Did we win? She asked, grabbing my arm as I passed. Did he get it all? I stopped. I looked at this girl, this ambitious, ruthless child who thought she had stolen my life. Yes, I said softly. He got it all, every single penny. I walked to the elevator and pressed the down button. Behind me, the courtroom doors opened, and the shouting began. The collapse of the house of Brandon wasn't a slow erosion. It was a controlled demolition. The IRS didn't wait. 6 days after the hearing, agents arrived at the Lux Design Group offices. They didn't care about the rebrand or the minimalist aesthetic. They cared about the 2 years of unpaid payroll taxes. They carried out computers and file boxes, the same boxes Catherine had used to pack my shoes in front of the staff. The bank foreclosed on the coastal estate 3 weeks later. The leverage Brandon had used to buy his lifestyle became the weight that crushed him. Madison lasted exactly as long as the credit cards did. When the corporate AMX was declined at a spa in Palm Springs, she didn't come home to support her man. She ghosted. I heard she's already interning for a tech CEO in Palo Alto. She wasn't a partner, she was a seasonal trend. Catherine tried to call me once. I saw her number flash on my screen. I didn't feel anger, I didn't feel the need to answer and hear her beg or blame. I just pressed block. That part of my life was a closed file. Brandon is currently navigating bankruptcy court and a federal indictment. He lives in a studio apartment that doesn't have a sunroom. He has the empire just like he wanted. It just happens to be an empire of ash. But I didn't stay to watch the fire burn. There is a philosophy I believe in now called the justice of the swur. Punitive justice is about punishment. It looks backward. It focuses on the pain of the past. But true justice, the kind that heals, is about creation. It focuses on what you plant in the soil that has been cleared. If I had spent my energy just hating Brandon, I would still be tethered to him. Instead, I took my settlement and a portion of my savings and launched the Haven project. I rent a small, modest office in the city. It has good light and solid walls. We design dignified, beautiful living spaces for women's shelters. We use trauma-informed design to create sanctuaries for women who are rebuilding their lives from zero. Women who, like me, had to plan their exits in silence. Yesterday, Ethan came by the office after school. He sat at a drafting table sketching on a pad. He looked up at me and smiled. He's safe. His future is secure. The trust fund is intact. I looked at the blueprints on my desk. For 14 years, I was the invisible architect of a narcissist's ego. I braced the walls of a house that was never meant to stand. Now, I build for myself, I build for Ethan, and I build for the women who are still looking for the door. True power isn't loud. It doesn't need a helicopter or a press release. True power is the quiet certainty that you can survive the demolition and build a cathedral from the rubble. I am Alyssa. I am the builder. If you believe that true power is silent and the best revenge is a life well lived, hit that like button and share this story. I'll see you in the next.